overview of what we covered last week, and then jump right into our high injury network and our hub site. Take it away, Catherine.
All righty. All right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen and hear me okay. So yeah, just welcome everyone. There was an agenda that was sent out ahead of time where we had lots of information, and we'll be going over that today. So if you didn't get a chance to read it, no worries. We will be doing a deep dive into that on the call today. So we do have about 90 minutes for today, and so we have a lot of materials to get through, but we also really want to hear from all of you. So we have a lot of time set aside for discussion, and we have a series of Mentimeter polls for you to provide feedback. So keep your phone or your computer handy so that way you can participate. And we're going to do it a little bit differently this time because we really want to help spur some discussion. So I know last time you were all overachievers and jumped ahead on answering questions. So this time we're just going to take sort of one question at a time and have our discussion. So let's just kind of jump into things. So here are just a few highlights from our first meeting where we spent some time getting to know each other, reviewing what to expect from the plan and the overall role of Metro Plan Orlando. We also reviewed the overall key tasks, the project schedule, the public engagement strategies. We provided an overview of Vision Zero and the safe system strategies and some preliminary crash information. And then we also wanted to understand what you thought might be the biggest barriers to reaching zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries in our region, as well as your thoughts related to the safety culture in your community. So we'll be keeping these ideas in mind as we progress with the project. So a summary of the first meeting was included as part of the agenda packet. So if you would like additional information, just encourage you to read through that. It has all of the polling results as well as a link to the recording if you weren't able to attend all of it. So the first topic here is the high injury network. So we've been spending a lot of time working on developing the high injury network for the region since we last met. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, the high injury network is a collection of roads where a disproportionate number of fatal and severe injury crashes occur. And by focusing our efforts on these roadways, we can really have the largest impact on reducing severe injury and fatal crashes on our roadway system. And just sort of tying it back to the Vision Zero core elements, this really relates to core element 8, which is the proactive systemic planning, core element 9, which is sort of the responsive and hotspot planning, and then the comprehensive evaluation and adjustments. And then we're also tying this to element 7, that equity focused analysis and programs. And as we go through all of the different aspects of the project, we're being very deliberate about tying it back to those core elements of Vision Zero and the safe system approach. And that's primarily to make sure that we're setting the region up for getting some of the implementation funding through Safe Streets for All. So just making sure that we're hitting on all of those requirements. So here on the screen are just a few example high injury networks. And so while the general process to develop high injury networks is the same across these examples, there are some nuances that we can consider here. And then as I share what we did for the Metro Plan region. So the first example here is for Dr. Cog. So this is the Council of Governments in the Denver region. And they had a very large high injury network that represented about 75% of their total serious and fatal injury crashes. And it was about 9% of their regional roadway network, which by high injury network standards is a very large network. And to make sure that they could then prioritize their efforts and really hone in on the most critical locations, they then overlaid what they called critical corridors. So then these became the first priority corridors for them really to have focused planning and engineering efforts on. And those critical corridors ended up representing about 32% of their KSI crashes on about 1% of the roadways. And then the other example here is in Forward Pinellas, a little closer to home. And their ultimate high injury network ended up reflecting about 40% of their fatal and severe injury crashes, with about 3% of their centerline miles. And in addition to identifying the high injury network, they went ahead and also identified top 20 crash locations. So they had sort of the network and hotspot approach. So to develop the high injury network, there's a few key pieces of information that we really need. So the first is the crash data, which we obtained from Signal 4 Analytics. And then for the purposes of developing the high injury network, we excluded the limited access and toll facilities from the analysis. But we did include those ramp terminal intersections. And then for the final high injury network at the regional level, we were only considering the federal aid roadway network because we wanted to make sure it was roadways where Metro Plan Orlando has some influence over the planning process and funding mechanisms. We then needed to map the crashes to the roadway network. And so for this analysis, we used the network obtained from the X Geographic Wave database. And this also contains a host of other information that we'll share a little bit more about later. But we're able to then tie crashes to land use and other transportation elements and demographics. And then the sort of roadway characteristics and other spatial data was really used to help inform the systemic analysis. And then lastly, we applied weights to each crash type based on the crash severity and then the travel mode represented in the crash. So as the goal of Vision Zero within the Safe System approach is to eliminate all serious and fatal injury crashes on roadways, we really wanted to identify those roadways where a high proportion or a disproportionate number of those fatal and severe injury crashes occur. And so in the crash database, there's 5 levels of crash severity. We have fatal and incapacitating. So fatal is a crash in which somebody that was involved in that crash dies within 30 days of the crash occurring. And then incapacitating injury, these are very severe injuries. We went through those in our last meeting, but it's really pretty significant life-altering trauma. And then we have the non-incapacitating injury, possible injury, and no injuries. So to develop a weight factor for each crash type, we used a modified equivalent property damage only weighting based on the highway safety manual approach. And there's a lot more details provided in the memorandum that was sent out in advance of the meeting, and we're happy to answer questions. But in the interest of not putting everyone to sleep, we won't go through all of those details. But just at a high level, for the purposes of developing the high injury network, we combined the fatal and incapacitating injury crashes with one crash weight type. As I mentioned on the fatal crashes, it only includes those where somebody died within 30 days. And so under the incapacitating injury, there could actually be some of those victims who end up passing away from their injuries outside of those 30 days that might not be included in the fatal numbers. And then conversely, sometimes a fatal crash could be involving somebody not wearing a seatbelt, and maybe that crash would have been a lower level of severity had they been wearing a seatbelt. So we really wanted to apply these weight factors to sort of adjust for some of these nuances. And then we also applied a weight factor based on the travel mode involved, recognizing that people walking, biking, and riding motorcycles are disproportionately involved in crashes that result in a severe injury or fatality. So based on the data and the prevalence of those types of crashes, we ended up applying a weight factor of 3 to those vulnerable roadway user crashes. And so for the purposes of this, that's people walking, people biking, and people riding motorcycles. And this factor is in line with what other jurisdictions have been using as well. So we crunched all of this data and used a sliding window approach to develop the network. here is the network that was developed for the Metro Plan Orlando region using this approach. So what you see here on the screen was really the result of some multiple iterations, and we had a goal of capturing between 40 and 60% of the fatal and severe injury crashes in the region. And overall, we have about 118 roadway segments that comprise the high injury network with an average segment length of about 2 miles. And segments were really determined through natural breaks in roadway features, such as the transition from number of lanes or contexts. And so some of the segments are a bit longer than 2 miles. So for planning purposes of identifying projects, we may ultimately want to break those into smaller segments. And then in addition to the identification of the high injury network, we also identified the top 30 intersections based on that same process to develop the high injury network. And so in the memo that I mentioned, there was a web link, so you can actually go in and turn on and off layers and explore on your own a little bit as well. So based on this analysis, we found that about half of the crashes in our region that result in death and serious injuries occur on about 4% of our roadways. And so this includes 61% of those fatal and severe injury pedestrian crashes, 50% the bike crashes, and about 44% of the motorcycle crashes. We then took a look at sort of what the top tier roadways and intersections were on that high injury network. So I'm just going to kind of pause on each of these screens so you can take a look. And so this is the top 10 roadway segments on the high injury network. And the roadway segments that are noted in the italics, then those are segments where a disproportionate share of those fatal and severe injury crashes involved a person outside of a vehicle. And then here are the next 20 segments. And you may have noticed that in the top 20, we have not left Orange County yet. And then when we get to the next 10, so this is the top 21 through 30 corridors, we start to see some segments in Osceola and Seminole County emerging as well. And so then as each of the county and local plans progresses, then separate high injury networks for each of those jurisdictions will be developed as well, just to make sure that we're really considering all of the roadways within the region. And then we'll sort of start going through the top 30 intersections. And so again, the ones that are in the bold italics are where a disproportionate number of people outside the vehicle are killed or severely injured. And then I wanted to make note that at intersection 1 of John Young Parkway and Sand Lake, there was a pretty significant improvement that was constructed about the end of 2019, early 2020. And so we were able to pull the crash data and take a look at it, and crash rates significantly decreased in 2020 through 2022 at that intersection. But the crash numbers were pretty high in the 2018, 2019. So, one of the questions that I have for the group is, are there any other intersections or segments on the high injury network where there have been some recent improvements that we might want to consider, and sort of maybe start taking a look at some before after analysis as well to document the benefits of some of these improvements? Then here are the next 10 segments. I'm sorry, next 10 intersections. Looks like, Josh, you have a question?
Yeah, it was it was actually on the last slide in regards to your question. I don't know if that was something you wanted an answer to right now or later on, but like something as far as before and after improvements. I noticed the intersection of Simpson Road at Earl of Bronson Memorial Highway. We're doing road widening for Simpson Road, which will include intersection improvements at that intersection. So we don't have, it's not the same thing where it was done, you know, part of the way through your data collection, but it might be worth noting for something to if there's a follow-up after completion of the project to see what the improvements are.
Yeah, most definitely. And when we get to the Mentimeter polls, that is one of our questions as well. And then would suggest sort of in the county and local plans, if there are instances like that, to also make note of it there, because one of the elements of Vision Zero is really to monitor progress. And so it'll be great to have a note of when things were completed. So that way, 5 years from now, when we all get to redo these plans again, we know what we need to go back and take a closer look at.
Thank you.
Then this was the top 11 through 20 intersections. And then also just wanted to note that all of the top 30 intersections are also on the high injury network as well. So there is that definite correlation. We don't always see that when we're preparing sort of high injury networks and the hotspot locations. All right, so we're gonna transition a little bit to some conversation. So I guess just thinking about some questions, and then we'll open up the Mentimeter poll and then have some discussion. Did any of the top roads or intersections surprise you? And then in terms of the high injury network and hotspot location, this is the process that we plan to replicate for each county and then each jurisdiction. So just want to see if folks had any concerns with that approach. So encourage you to go to Mentimeter. And for those of you who are in the audience just listening, if you have feedback on any of these questions, please provide that as well. And then I did put an option in here that you can kind of upvote a response. So if somebody said something that you agree with, feel free to give it a like. Laura?
Hey, I have a question about the equivalent property damage. So about a year or so ago, we had an intern project looking at the different methodologies for high injury networks. And one of the things she found is that that's usually used for MPOs, kind of like you're talking about, that this will be used to help prioritize funding. And so it can be helpful in that tying, linking the cost of investments to the equivalent property damage only. The concern there is that it sort of, by quantifying the cost of these, we can dehumanize the lives lost. And I haven't seen a lot of municipalities use EPDO in their methodologies as well. So with sort of that said, would there be a concern with municipalities dropping EPDO because of that sort of link to prioritization of funds and all of that within this framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have seen other places use the EPDO method at sort of all of the scales, and it's really just a way to determine the equivalent sort of weighting of crashes. Yeah, Mike, was there anything that you might want to add there?
Yeah, I think also there's two things that we've done there. One is combining the incapacitating and the fatal is a way of really focusing more on the incapacitating because the fatals can be, like Catherine said, it can be at the whim of something that was incapacitated could have just as easily been a fatal. So So it's just a more objective way of prioritizing the incapacitating crashes. And then we've also weighted the vulnerable road users separately, just by their nature. So I think we're doing what we can to mitigate that, dehumanizing aspect of the process.
And then Josh, I think you had a question.
Yeah, it was just that the Mentimeter is already gone to the next question, but the first one, did it surprise you? And if so, why? It was just a thumbs up. I wasn't sure if that was on purpose or not. So
Yeah.
Opportunity to actually answer it.
I'm seeing that now. Like some issues there.
I just wanted to make you aware in case I didn't want to throw off your.
No, I appreciate that. Let me. All right, well, we have a session coming up where I am not speaking, and so I will go through the next section and then I will fix it while Stephen and Will share our hub site. So apologies for that, but be thinking about the answers. Alex, you got a question there?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to Laura really quickly. So each municipality will have the chance individually to update the methodology for themselves. So, while we're having this regional discussion, and it's our intent to at least replicate for consistency across, all of our kind of 20 plus municipal plans, each municipality will have the option and the data to revise, if that's the prerogative of each municipality. If they want to remove that as a criteria, change the weighting for whatever reason, we'll be delivering to them kind of that draft product. And then they'll be able to work with their city staff, with the consultants team at the city or local plan level to refine that methodology. But again, to Catherine's point, we have seen kind of a full range of use. And at the end of the day, we just need to build consensus around a method. And that's where we're allowing each city to refine as they see fit along the way. Hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, I have another one too, but I don't want to hog the floor if someone else has a question.
I would say go for it. And I think I fixed Mentimeter. So
in the SS4A notice of funding opportunities, it always talks about, to the extent possible or practical, analysis should not exclude any roadways based on jurisdiction. So I wanted to make sure I understand that you've pulled out roads that are not federal aid eligible from this.
Well, I mean, that was the intent, but actually on the high injury network, all of them were federal aid eligible from the regional perspective. So there wasn't any pulling out of those roadways.
Okay. In moving to the locals, we want to make sure that that might not be the case. Locals might have federal aid, high injury network roads that are not federal aid eligible, but we want to keep those in based on the USDOT recommendations.
So actually for each of the local jurisdictions, we'll be preparing 2 high injury networks. One that's the encompasses all roadways that travel through their jurisdiction regardless of ownership. And then another high injury network that's just the roadways that they control. And so the intent is sort of, that top up, bottom down, and identifying a range of projects. And I imagine that what will end up being on the sort of the local jurisdiction roadway network will be a lot of those low cost, quick build type projects that hopefully can be implemented at a faster pace than some of the projects on the regional roadway network. So we're kind of doing both.
Excellent.
Right. Moving on here to the next question, just about replicating the approach. Lauren, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just a quick question. Although this prioritization is important, or finding out this information is important from a prioritization standpoint. This is not the only thing that we're going to be looking at, correct? I mean, I want to make sure that it's also taken into account, although it's probably very similar. If you look at the stats, these are areas where there's a lot more pedestrians, a lot more transit, a lot more low vehicle ownership, that kind of thing. Is that kind of being thought about as well when the prioritization lists are being put together?
Yes. And we're still kind of pulling through the final statistics. We wanted to finalize the high injury network first, but it disproportionately runs through those communities of concern where you have lower auto ownership, higher transit usage, all of those factors that you mentioned. Alex?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that we're not yet in that prioritization, project prioritization step or phase of this effort. The analysis and method that was described was specific to really a needs identification of the high injury network, not in prioritizing projects specifically, where we will consider other criteria and factors. So I just want to be specific that we're not in that step yet. This is more true to the needs assessment phase of the process of the transportation process.
Okay, thank you.
Umberto?
Yes, and good afternoon. Catherine, the high injury network is just based on the crashes, or do you have any other variable? For instance, is that based on AADTs? Is that based on origin and destination, maybe to have some transit? So what is the criteria besides just the crashes? Or
Yeah, for the high injury network, it's really just the crash and the severity. And then we'll sort of be looking at crash trends as well to really understand who and what, how along the high injury network, and then other roadways as well, so we can be proactive with our improvements.
Yeah, in our crash analysis, this PJ, it looks at 3 components. So crash rates basically by what are the roadway characteristics present, how close is it to the nearest grocery store, transit stop, or whatever it may be, and then crash rates by demographic layers, so 0 vehicle household percentages and things like that. So we've got a very comprehensive statistical database that we're still working on. And all of that information you'll be able to see charts with maps and story map format on our hub site. So we're just still kind of working on that.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just reading through some of the comments here. So in terms of the flexibility to adjust the methodology, there's definitely that flexibility. And I would say that that's going to be very important for some of the smaller jurisdictions where this approach may not yield a high injury network that makes sense. So as we finalize the regional and the county, there'll definitely be opportunities to weigh in as those local networks are prepared. All right, let's see. Any other questions before we move on? This was great feedback. Okay. So that was the high injury network, but the high injury network doesn't really tell the whole story. So we've been making a lot of progress on the crash analysis, but we wanted to make sure we had the high injury networks ready to go. So we're putting the finishing touches on that overall crash analysis, and we'll have something to share with the task force in the coming weeks. But we wanted to just share with you some of our key findings and progress and get some initial feedback, make sure that we're on the right track of pulling out the information that you all are most interested in. So at our last meeting, we provided some high-level crash trends as we frame the core elements of Vision Zero and the safe system approach. And so just kind of wanted to talk through some things here locally. So over the past 5 years, there's been over 325,000 reported crashes on our roads. And this includes all roads in the region. And most of those did not result in an injury. And then about 30% of those resulted in a minor injury, and then less than 3% combined resulted in that serious injury or fatality that we're most concerned about eliminating. And then just wanted to note that between 2018 and 2022, we did see a decrease in the total number of reported crashes. Some of it has the roots in the pandemic and lower rates of driving during that time period as well, and lower reporting rates. But we also saw between 2020 and 2022, the proportion of crashes that resulted in a fatality or a serious injury increasing. And so while some of those trends seem to be leveling off, we're still not really trending in the right direction. And then when we look at who is involved in crashes by their severity, we find that for crashes where no injury is reported, it's overwhelming between people in motor vehicles. And then as the injuries start to occur, the share of crashes involving those vulnerable roadway users starts to increase. And then just for the purposes of this presentation, we combined anybody outside the vehicle, so somebody walking, biking on a motorcycle, as they're disproportionately more likely to be killed or injured. And so we find that for crashes where there's a serious injury, about 28% of those outside the vehicle are injured. And when there's a fatality, almost half of those people are outside the vehicle. So before we share some of the analysis results, kind of just wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive on the data that we did use. So for crash data, we used what's in Signal 4 analytics. And then we realized that in Signal 4, it doesn't fully include crashes that did not involve a motor vehicle. And, you know, there's crashes that occur at railroad crossings between trains and people walking, people biking. So we wanted to make sure that we considered those types of crashes as well. We also looked at some hospital data, which we'll share a little bit here towards the end. We looked at a host of roadway data. So number of lanes, turn lanes, traffic volumes, posted speed, whether or not there's a median, the presence of walking and biking facilities, functional classification, context classification. And then we also looked at a host of contextual data. So, you know, where are the key destinations, public schools, transit stops, what do the underlying demographics look like? Is it in an underserved community? So this was really all of the data that went into this analysis. And so as we reviewed the crash analysis, you know, there's so much data, but if all you remember from this presentation is just sort of a few of the key takeaways. So daily, almost 5 people are killed or severely injured on roadways in Orange, Osceola, and Seminole County. So that's a staggering number of lives that are changed in an instant each day. And then vulnerable road users are disproportionately killed or seriously injured. They're involved in less than 3% of all crashes, and then 25% of those serious injury crashes and 48% of fatal crashes. And then crashes that result in a fatality or a severe injury are more likely to occur on high speed, high volume roadways. So if that's all you take away from this presentation today, then we've done our job. But hopefully you'll take away a little bit more. So, you know, with that framing in mind, we wanted to understand what types of crashes are happening in the region and then the outcome and what those outcomes typically are. So this here isn't all crash types. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see everything on the screen, but really the some that are the most prevalent, with the chart showing the percent of all crashes attributable to that crash type, as well as the total number that result in a severe injury or fatality. So for example, with a head-on collision, which is defined as a crash where two vehicles collide head-on, that's about 1% of total crashes in the region, not on limited access facilities, but over 3% of crashes where someone is killed or severely injured. And then conversely, rear end crashes are the most prevalent of all crashes at about 40%, but only about 22% of those crashes result in a severe injury or fatality. So as we wrap up the regional crash analysis, we'll be documenting the types of roadways where these crashes are most prevalent to then identify those opportunities for implementation of countermeasures. And then this data can also help us to understand some trade-offs as we start to think about those engineering countermeasures at intersections and along roads. For example, a countermeasure could significantly reduce the potential for a left turn related crash, but could result for the potential in increased rear end crashes. And so we'll want to balance out some of those trade-offs as we're looking at potential improvements. We then looked at the speed limit of roadways compared to the number of crashes that occur on them. In our region, local streets, they're the most prevalent and slowest, and not surprisingly, they have the lowest rates of fatal and severe injury crashes. And then as the posted speed increases, so does the frequency of fatal and severe injury crashes. So for example, about 4% of roads in the region have a speed limit of 35 miles per hour, and about 11% of the fatal and severe injury crashes occur on those roadways. Whereas 45 mile per hour roadways are about 6% of the total roads, and over 40% of crashes that occur in a fatal or severe injury crash occur on those roadways. So really, we need to focus on those higher speed roadways. We also evaluated these trends in comparison to the number of travel lanes, traffic volumes, and a host of other data, and found similar relationships. So as the number of lanes, as the traffic volumes increase, so did the rate of fatal and severe injury crashes. So as you're approaching a roadway widening or other type of project, really understanding what are some countermeasures that you might be able to incorporate as part of those roadway projects. For the next analysis, we looked at the context classification of the roadway. And while most of you probably know what this is, for those that don't, the Florida Department of Transportation uses a context-based approach to planning, designing, and operating the state transportation network. And to support that process, they adopted a roadway classification system comprised of the 8 context classifications for all non-limited access state roadways. And so the purpose of the context classification is to broadly identify the various built environments that exist in Florida that are shown here on this figure. And then this is used to determine key design criteria like target speed, intersection spacing, and the most common context classification for roads in the Metroplan Orlando region is the C3C, so the suburban commercial designation. So these are commonly 4 to 6 lane roadways. They provide direct access to primarily commercial uses. And there's a lot of activity going on these roadways. Most C3C corridors in the region also have transit routes. And they also have a posted speed limit of around 40 to 45 miles per hour. So when we look at crashes by the context classification, we can see that they're most likely to occur on those C3C roadways. So that's suburban commercial context. It's where we have lots of activity happening. It's where we have fairly high speeds that can disproportionately result in a fatal or severe injury when there is a crash that occurs. And then since this just represents the FDOT roadways in the region, we did something similar just by functional classification and really saw that collector and arterial roadways have that higher proportion of fatal and severe injury crashes. And these, again, they tend to be roadways with lots of things happening, multimodal activity, higher speeds, higher numbers of lanes. We were then also curious of, what about medians? Do medians matter? And based on our analysis in the region, then yes, we definitely see improvements in crash rates or decreases in those fatal and severe injury crash rates for all modes when there's a median present, especially on those 2 and 4 lane roadways for people walking and biking. They are definitely beneficial on 6+ lane roadways, but the benefits start to decrease as the roadways get wider and faster. We also looked at, where crashes are happening and sort of some of those underlying demographics, and really, as Lauren alluded to before, crashes are more likely to occur in areas where transit ridership is the highest, auto ownership is the lowest, and on roads that traverse designated disadvantaged communities. So this will definitely be a focus area for the project. We are also curious about how road user behavior contributes to crashes as well, with behavior such as speeding, drinking, being impaired. And the drug related, I just wanted to note that also includes prescription drugs. So it's not just illegal drugs. And so we really wanted to see how some of these road user behaviors can contribute to the serious injury or fatal crash trends. And it was interesting seeing how the distracted driving definitely contributed to overall fatal and severe injury crashes, but had less of an effect on those vulnerable roadway user crashes. We did a bit of a deeper dive on the speeding related crashes and the impaired related crashes, and we were able to correlate that with driver's license data and sort of the age or the percent of people in each age bracket that have their driver's license. And so basically what this chart is showing that people ages 20 through 29 are disproportionately more likely to be involved in a speeding related crash than drivers of other ages. And then when we look at the impaired crashes, it's people ages sort of 20 to 40 that are disproportionately involved in those impaired crashes. And so this includes alcohol and drugs. And as I mentioned, that does also include prescription drugs. And then just also wanted to note that for the 65 and up age bracket, this likely includes people who, maybe retired or partially retired, not driving quite as much, and then people who may not drive at all but still have a driver's license. So we also took a look at seatbelt use and helmets, and we noted that of the fatal vehicle crashes, 40% of vehicle occupants were not wearing a seatbelt in the region. And then for motorcyclist crashes, only 21% of them were wearing an FDOT compliant helmet. And the data also showed that 34% were not wearing a helmet or it was a non-compliant helmet. And then 43% of that data set had no data at all. So this is sort of, going through the crash reporting and seeing that there is some incomplete and inconsistent information for some of the crash types. We also took a look at hit and run crashes to see who was involved in those. And that makes up about 14% of overall crashes in the region. And then slightly less than 10% of crashes that result in a severe injury or fatality. And then the numbers are much higher when it includes a vulnerable roadway user. And then, as I mentioned before, we were able to look at some hospital admissions data from the Florida Injury Surveillance System. And so this slide here focuses on people riding bicycles. And so from that data, we are able to summarize that about 66% of bike crashes resulting in an emergency room visit, about 60% resulting in an admission, and then 20% of bike crashes that result in a fatality did not involve a motor vehicle. So there's a whole subset of crashes that we're missing from the Signal 4 database. And, these can be two trail users colliding or somebody not wearing a helmet, falling off their bicycle, hitting their head, a whole host of things. So, we'll be including some of these summaries to try and fill in some of those gaps. So really just, some key takeaways from the crash analysis. So really, the number of travel lanes, volumes, and speed contribute to higher fatal and severe injury crash rates. Those suburban commercial arterials disproportionately are locations for fatal and severe injury crashes. We found that seatbelt and helmet use are low in fatal vehicle and motorcycle crashes. And then crashes that result in a severe injury or fatality are more likely to occur in disadvantaged communities. So here we're going to pause a little bit for some discussion. So just if any of the results surprised you, and if there's anything that we didn't go over today that you'd like to see some more information about. So. And then if there's any questions, comments that folks want to make while we're waiting for some of the results. Eric, it looks like you have a question or comment.
Hi, I just wanted to, because I have to leave, but last month, Mike and I, we had a little discussion on the opportunity for using Tesla vehicles as a way to gather information on near misses, because this is data on post crashes. Is there a way for us to collect data on areas where those crashes that didn't occur, but they were near misses, which ultimately result in a crash at some point in the future? And so we did just a quick research on that and trying to get data from Tesla on their vehicles being involved in near misses is almost impossible. But lo and behold, Osceola County has implemented a technology that is monitoring intersections and observing those near misses. And I only bring it up because number one, it is a way for us to identify those areas where crashes will ultimately occur, so we can put in some countermeasures. And then secondly, Gary Yeager is the project manager in Osceola County, and he's going to be giving a presentation on this project at the next TSMO meeting, October the 27th.
Right. Yeah, there's some great technology out there that can be used to help identify near misses and a host of other things. So we'll make sure to attend that meeting on the 27th. All right. Umberto, and let's see, I'm going to move to the next slide as well if folks are ready for that.
Yeah, Catherine, have you considered also data from crashes from micromobility vehicles? I don't know if that has been collected. I know that when we're doing our research, usually there are no crash reports because when they happen, people go to the hospital. So we have gone or gathered data from hospitals. Maybe not now, but in the future, it's going to be prevalent, especially in some of these corridors for the city of Orlando and for Orange County, especially the I-Drive. So maybe as part of the Vision Zero action plan, maybe there's a strategy how to gather and to collect this data in the future.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And we do have a data request into some of the local hospital systems to see what we're able to gather. And hopefully we're able to get something that we can then share, at least broad summaries. We have to be mindful of people's privacy and whatnot. But yeah, that would be great to incorporate.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, any other comments, questions? I'll leave this one. Oh.
Yeah, this is PJ. So also, if you think of any combinations of variables that you would like to see, like we did the medians with the number of lanes, if there are any cool combinations you think of, like for example, I know 2-lane roads, 55-mile-an-hour plus, a lot of fatal crashes. Just feel free to send those over because we can incorporate those pretty quickly.
Yeah, and another analysis that we're working on is looking at, in terms of pedestrian crashes, how many occur at an intersection, and then when they're not at an intersection, how far were they from the closest marked crossing? Because I'm kind of curious to see how far we're expecting people to walk to a marked crossing. Laura?
I just wanted to elaborate on the medians. It's especially of interest to us, I think, with regards to fire and emergency services, specifically medians on 2-lane roads versus medians on 4-lane roads. If there's any safety benefit. And then can you just let me know the data source for the bike crashes that don't involve a motor vehicle? I was also sort of taken aback by that stat, and I'm chatting with our bike ped planner, and her mind is blown. We're trying to figure out where that came from and how to conceptualize that, because that 20% is a lot.
Yeah, I'll send you a link to it. I think it's the Florida Injury Surveillance System. So it has a host of other data, so I can forward that to you.
Region specific?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, I pulled that out by county, and so what they provide in there is bicyclist injuries, either emergency room, hospital admission, or fatality, and then they split them out by involving a motor vehicle and not involving a motor vehicle. And so from that, I was able to combine the two of them together and see what percentage did not involve a motor vehicle. There was survey work done many years ago by the League of American Bicyclists that actually found something similar. And typically what they find is that these are injuries that are caused by pavement, surface issues, obstacles, some sort of vertical obstacle, usually, along a sidewalk, mechanical problems, bike-to-bike crashes, often involving group rides. Because they're going faster, they tend to be more serious injuries. So it really tends to be things that are not really infrastructure related, but more training related injuries. And I see Emily's hand up, and she actually brought up a good point to me about when we talked about this a while back, that it really is those hospital admissions for the non-motorists tend to skew older age. A lot of those were age 40 and up. And so it's part of the reason for hospital admissions for those people may be that they have pre-existing conditions that have aggravated their injury, that a younger or just a generally more healthy person wouldn't have been required a hospital admission, but because of their underlying conditions, they may have to spend a night or two in the hospital.
See, Emily, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was actually going to follow up with what Mike had mentioned, but he captured that. That was some information that he shared with me at one of the prior Metroplan board meetings, and I had asked that question. What were the percentages of older adults, and I wonder if they had pre-existing conditions that warranted the hospitalization versus just a routine care for their injury. So thank you, Mike, for following up with that additional information. I think that that's pretty fitting. And I also, too, was blown away by that statistic. But I think now knowing who the demographic is, it makes sense why that statistic is as high as it is.
All right, let's see, some great comments and feedback for us. So lots of data analysis to do. All right, so something else that we wanted to share with you all today is the hub site, and we'll have a brief demo here, and then in the next couple of days we'll probably be sending out a link to everybody to do some beta testing and help us break it before we have it go live to everyone else. So the hub site, it's really intended to be an information sharing platform. We'll have a Vision Zero dashboard. We'll have links to project documents. Some of it will be access restricted. It's really intended for all of the other consultant teams working on projects and all of those agencies to be able to have access to your high injury network shape files and crash data and other things. We'll have links to helpful resources. And so we pre-populated this with some information, but I think this will be something that we can crowdsource throughout the project and just share useful links. And then we'll have a calendar of Vision Zero events that will be hosted throughout the region so we can all see what everybody else is doing. And then ultimately it will be used as well for some public engagement. And then there's a data dashboard where you can go in and take a look at data and filter and take a look at things. So there's still a little bit of work to be done on this, but I'm going to hand it over to Stephen to do a demo of what this all includes. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so he can share his for a few moments.
All right, and can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, we've been developing this hub site. I'm going to let Will Edmondson, who's also on the call, kind of go through the site itself, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the dashboard.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So yeah, Stephen mentioned this is our the draft version of our Regional Vision Zero hub site application. So what you're seeing here is our homepage, and so within the homepage, we have some contextual information, so providing an overview of what the Regional Vision Zero is, what's included as in part of this effort. And then we also have a section on why this matters. So really kind of setting the stage for the material and content that we are making available on this application. And then moving into the next tab, we have the Regional Vision Zero data dashboard. So here we just provide the user the ability to kind of start diving into the data itself and gather some key statistics. So Stephen's going to talk a little bit more in depth on the data dashboard itself. But moving over to the next tab, we have project resources. So as Catherine mentioned, this is where we will have content that is available for staff and our internal resources. We'll have final documents, template items, and then the collision data specific. So this is all integrated within the platform itself, and so we'll be able to control what is available to the public versus our internal resources. And then, yeah, moving over to external resources. Also, as Catherine mentioned, we've included some informational websites, governmental programs, so quick links and some summaries on what each of those resources include. And then we've also separated further down a section that is related to research and case study resources that are available. So this will be somewhat of a kind of a living document we can add and remove as needed. And then we also have a space in the next tab for the calendar that is coming soon. We'll be having sort of a table format highlighting some of those key upcoming meetings and meeting types moving forward. And then that kind of covers the web page. We also have some contact information at the bottom for folks to reach out, and then we'll be adding more content for the public engagement side as well.
All right, thank you, Will. So going back to the actual data dashboard. So the intention here is to give people an opportunity to really go build their own sort of query or question for a specific region or a specific time of day or year. This is all of the same data that was used to create the high injury networks and will be used to create the local jurisdiction networks, but it gives you an opportunity to set filters and see a bunch of insights depending on what type of filters that you set. So just going through the left panel of the page, we are looking at 5 years of signal 4 data. You can query by county, by all of the Metro Plan jurisdictions. You can go by crash severity or crash mode. Then you can select various years or times of day broken into 3-hour buckets. You can choose whether or not you want to include limited access facility. And as a default, they're turned off, which is why some of these percentages at the top don't add up to 100. But if you turn them on, everything goes to 100%. So by default, there's no toll roads or I-4 or anything like that. And then after that, whether or not a collision occurs within one of those disadvantaged communities or equity emphasis areas. So across the top, there's some statistics that will update depending on which filter is selected. So it's looking at the total KSI collisions, total bike KSIs, PED KSIs, and motorcycle KSIs. And then along the bottom, we also have some of those KSI statistics for aggressive driving, alcohol related, distracted driving, hit and runs, aging driver, which is categorized as 65 or older, and then teenage drivers as well. And then just to get a little deeper into the data, we have some charts here, which I'm not sure if you can see. I'll zoom in a little bit. So this is looking at similar to what we had in our crash slides. This is collisions by number of lanes and posted speed. So this will tell you, so in the current extent for all the filters that are selected, which is basically the entire region except for limited access facilities, this is the breakdown of, this is actually looking at all collisions for 3 lanes or less, or 4 to 5 lanes, or 6 lanes or more, and then it's divided out by posted speed. And then there's also ability to look at, day of week versus time of day. So these are the 3-hour buckets that I was talking about. And you can see that, there's a higher share of those late night, early morning collisions on the weekends compared to the regular week when a lot of the collisions are occurring during the day. So as an example, if you wanted to just look at, Seminole County, motorcycle collisions in the morning peak hour, you would just set some type of filter like that. All of the corresponding charts will refresh. So you can see here are the locations of those actual KSIs that you selected. Here's the breakdown of, one of these that you selected is distracted driving, one's a hit and run. You can see a lot of left turn collisions are KSIs, and then rear ends and side swipes as well. So the intent here is just to really give the user an opportunity to go through and kind of whatever question they have, to just be able to kind of filter through and see the results for the crash data for the 5 years.
Great,
so,
thanks,
yeah.
Stephen. I think Patrick, you had your hand raised. All right, well, let's see, any questions from folks on this, or a quick query you want Stephen to run? All right, Alex.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add that, we're developing this as part, Metro Plan Orlando's developing this as part of, our regional, Vision Zero plan, but this is something that as an organization, it's our intent to maintain as we go forward into the future. So just wanted to, this will be a living site. The data that you see here will be updated regularly. So just wanted to add that, but thank you, Catherine.
Great. Emily?
Yes. So Patrick messaged me. He is a guest, so he cannot speak. I'm not sure if you can invite him in as a panelist, but I'm sure he's got some questions. And once I'm on maternity leave, he's going to be my stand-in. So it's probably good that he attended today. Thank you, Patrick.
Oh,
All right.
thank
Well,
you.
I'm not
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. No, well, first of all, I wanted to say hats off for the dashboard. I think it's really fantastic. I've been involved in these projects before, and I know what it takes to pull these together. It looks great. I'm really happy to see the temporal data be an option there for filtering. But I was really curious, is the data that's being shown now normalized against, even just average traffic volumes in those 3-hour blocks, or is that an option?
It's currently
That-
not.
Okay.
But that is something we could look into.
And that's certainly something that will be in our branched out story maps as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that would be potentially insightful, but either way, pretty important to look at that across a normalized plane so we could maybe discover any disproportionate blocks of time. That has a lot to do with, as we look forward into, what's the infrastructure context here. We can learn a lot from the infrastructure and things like the speed and the medians and things like that, but it will ultimately be very important for everyone to understand, are we looking at it in dusk, dawn, daytime, and stuff like that? Because the same infrastructure and the same context means very, very different things if it's daytime or nighttime.
Yeah, there are so many myriad factors that we can look at, and to pile them into this dashboard would be overwhelming for the users. But we're going to do those most meaningful queries based on a lot of the sketch analysis that we've done, so that we can show that in a map format, so that people really get a clear understanding without having to understand the query process, so they can understand how those factors relate to the crash problem.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Thank you, Mike. Thank you all.
And yeah, we're still going to stick on the topic here of the hub, but really wanting to get some responses of what additional information you might like to see. So that question prompt is now up. And then we're also interested in what information we can provide to make it more comfortable for you to use this type of interactive dashboard. As we prepare to unveil this to the public as well, we want to make sure that it's accessible for people and they can use it as intended. Hopefully I'm not having issues with this slide. I'm not seeing responses yet. And then, as I mentioned, we will be sending out a link to this to kind of let you fool around with a little bit more. We know that you only had 10 minutes to think about this, so you will probably have a lot more feedback once you can dive into it. Right.
Hey, Catherine, I did have a question real quick. And I apologize, I'm driving, so this might have already been an answer. But are you going to provide any type of like text box explanations for some of the data dashboard information to explain to the general public what it is that they're looking at and what maybe their queries are showing? If we're going to push this out to the public, they're not going to be familiar with maybe how they're manipulating the data and what responses they're looking at from those queries. So I'm just curious as to how your community outreach on explaining that data was going to work.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. And that's something that we're planning to incorporate once we kind of get all of what data we want it to show all built in. But yeah, that will be on the list of things. Right, Alex, it looks like you have your hand raised. Is that from before?
Yes, my apologies.
Okay. No worries. All right. Well, in the interest of time, gonna move on to the next section, and then there will be another opportunity for you to provide feedback on the hub site. So just wanted to highlight some of the planned outreach that will be going on. So we are putting together a public officials guide to Vision Zero. And so we have kind of a rough outline, and it will include some crash trends and some key definitions and some sort of sound bites, if you will. But we're really interested in hearing from everyone what they might like to see on that officials guide to Vision Zero, what some of the questions are that their elected officials are asking, or what you wish they knew, so we can incorporate that into this guide. We're also planning to develop a survey that will be disseminated to the general public, along with some map-based feedback. And so as part of the survey, we are interested in knowing what you want to know from your community related to transportation safety. So then that way the survey can be used broadly for plans across the region. We're developing some safety messaging, so really tying it back to the local crash data, but also to the FDOT and NHTSA safety messaging programs. Working on collecting some personal stories to share, and then putting together the speaker series. So I know we mentioned the speaker series last time, and so we've really, based on the feedback from that call and some further reflection, really narrowed it down to 5 key themes for speakers. So centering equity and road safety and removing systemic barriers, talking about and learning more about the victim experience and how to communicate appropriately with victims, the importance of language, so using the word crash, not accident, some training around that, speed management. A lot of the crashes that we talked about are really on those high speed roadways. And so what is working here and elsewhere in the country and across the world that we can really learn from. So a deeper dive on speed management. And then a session on the role of legislation and enforcement, just so we can understand a little bit more about that as well. So those were kind of the 5 key themes that we honed in on. So just wanted to open it up to everyone in terms of some questions here. So understanding, what Vision Zero communication tools you all would like to have to make it easy for you to share information. And then understanding from your perspective what speaker series topics look most interesting. And then if you could ask the public anything about safety, what would it be? Put this back up on the screen, and then if folks just have comments or questions. And thanks, Mike, for sharing the link to the hospital data in the chat. So Laura, that's there for you. Umberto?
Yes, Catherine, thank you so much for the speaker series. And one of the things that we're noticing in Orange County, so we talk about 2 types of drivers, ones that they're commuters, but the other ones that they drive within the neighborhood. And surprisingly, when people are complaining from the neighborhoods that they want traffic calming, whether that is speed humps or traffic circles, it seems that a high number of violators, people speeding, are within their neighbors. So the message, I guess, that I would like to put out there is be a safe neighbor, because that's where we have a lot of people, especially with kids in high schools and school zones and so on. The people that violate or that they are speeding, they are the neighbors. They are the people living within the communities, and those are the type of complaints that we are getting. So of course, commuters, because they're traveling fast and they want to get to their destination. But if we can address being a safe neighbor, I think that can go a long ways.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Melissa?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have to piggyback off of Humberto. I, as well, in my community in Ponciano, we just had a horrible crash of a grandmother and 3 children that passed away. And that's literally up the block from where I live. And these are the blocks that when I got on, Metro Plan Board and Vision Zero, and my whole advocacy is about the Marigold, Laurel, and these little intersections. And you're absolutely right. It's the neighbors. It was a 15-year-old unlicensed that went out and this happened with. The family, the sadness throughout my community is huge, but that doesn't stop the very following day there being another accident. So yes, that message across to the neighbors. I'm one that I have gotten the signs that say, act like your children are playing on this block, because I've seen the effect of it slowing people down when they, look at the idea of their children being the ones that they're going to take this U-turn corner at 30 miles per hour. So thank you so much for that. I appreciate this group.
Yeah, it sounds like some customizable yard signs that can be printed out and available could be something we could add to the communications toolkit as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other comments? Right, and leave this one here open for another 5 seconds, and then I'll move to the last one. So we'll come back and look at those responses in a few moments, but I just want to make sure that we keep to our schedule here. So just wanted to highlight a couple of upcoming tasks. And I'm going to ask my colleague Christoph just to spend a few minutes kind of talking through some of the next things that we're working on, just so you all know what we're doing.
Sure. All right. So I'll go over this quickly. I know we're running out of time. Just 2 of the tasks that are kind of in the works as part of this plan. The first one is the policy framework or benchmarking. And this is a way for agencies to evaluate how their policies, their processes, the procedures, how they align with the Vision Zero core elements and a safe system approach. So the process begins with identifying the various documents that should be evaluated. And then the next step is to basically develop these benchmarks and refine them with a series of questions to evaluate that alignment. The next 3 steps for this are really critical to the success of the benchmarking process, because this is where the agencies and the stakeholders really need to have that honest conversation on where they're falling short and figuring out how to turn things around. And then the last steps, number 6, is really just documenting these findings and incorporating this into the action plan. Next slide. So here we have an example of part of the benchmarking matrix. And of course, this matrix has the 10 core elements that Catherine mentioned before, which are grouped into 3 main categories. The first one is about leadership and commitment, how engaged and committed the agency's leadership are into reaching Vision Zero or reaching 0 fatalities and serious injuries. The second category is about safe roads and safe speeds. How are all modes accounted for in the plans and projects of the agency? How is speed factored into the equation? And then the last part is about data-driven approach and accountability. So are the investments being made on a data-driven process? How is equity a factor in that process? And so if we're looking at taking this example, look at the top one, the category would be safe roads and safe speeds. The element would be complete streets for all. And then these 6 questions are the ones that are used to evaluate how the agency aligns with that particular element. Next slide. So the next one is the engineering countermeasure toolbox. And so here's a preview of the toolbox. So before we actually talk about the toolbox, I just wanted to define the word countermeasure for the benefit of everybody on the call. And it's basically any strategy or solution that is designed to mitigate a safety concern. So in this case, we're talking about engineering countermeasures, but I just want to mention that there are non-engineering countermeasures, such as like safety campaigns, that are used to address some of these safety concerns. So this particular countermeasure toolbox is going to include 106 countermeasures that are applicable to different roadways and contexts across the Metro Plan area. And this is meant to really help agencies start thinking about what could be applied to mitigate some of their safety concern. It's definitely not meant to replace in-depth analysis, but it's really just to kind of give you an idea of what could be applied, start thinking about what could be done on different roadways based on the types of crashes that you're trying to mitigate. I don't think we have time to go into some of the different factors, so I'll pass it back over to Catherine, and probably on the next call we'll kind of do a deeper dive into the toolbox.
Great, thanks, Christoph. So I'm just going to kind of go through here next steps. So just wanted to share again sort of the overall project schedule. So we're sort of wrapping up that crash analysis portion and developing the high injury networks and getting together a whole bunch of information to share with all the other agency partners. And then this fall, we'll really be working on the engineering countermeasures, the toolbox, the policy, benchmarking, leading up into all the items that will happen next year. So just wanted to remind folks that our next task force meeting will be November 28th. So on that call, it'll be really doing a deeper dive onto some of the policy strategies and the countermeasure strategies. And then just wanted to note that some of the agency plans are already underway. So as we progress, we'll be coordinating with those plans. Then we expect the hub site to be going live by the end of the month. So we'll be sending out a link to you all later this week to get some feedback. So here is our sort of last set of questions. So as part of the benchmarking process, if there are a few folks on the task force that would be interested in being part of a subcommittee to help evaluate the regional policies, please let us know. Hopefully it shouldn't be that much of your time if you're already familiar with a lot of the policies. We'll have gone through a lot of the heavy lifting, and really it's to help us fill in the gaps where we really need that local knowledge. And then also just interested in any additional comments, questions you may all have. And then we've set aside a few minutes here at the end for just general public comment if there is any. So just wanted to make sure folks knew that was coming as well. Right. And then just pause here. If you have an inspiration in the night and really want to be part of the benchmarking subcommittee, please reach out to Mike and we'll make sure to loop you in on those conversations. Mike or Cynthia, did you want to lead this portion? Want to make sure it's done correctly?
Sure, and right, for all of our meetings, we of course have a session for public comment. And so if whether you are in the attendees group or attending by phone, you can either raise your hand if you're using the web browser or dial *9 on your phone. and we'll recognize you and take your comment. All right, well, not seeing any hands up, so we won't have any public comment then. And I want to give a big thank you to Catherine and her team for a great presentation, and to all of you for really great feedback this afternoon. And that wraps up our meeting for today, and we will see you in November, at the end of November for next meeting.
Again, if any additional questions arise, please feel free to reach out to Mike or myself, and we'll make sure to get you an answer.
Indeed. Take care, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
you.